Then Toad sat and pondered long and deeply, for he was hungry and quite penniless, and still some way he knew not how far, but from home. The enemies might still be looking for him. To one in such a situation, 5 shillings may very well appear a large sum of money. On the other hand, it did not seem very much to get for a horse. But then again, the horse hadn't cost him anything in the first place, so whatever he got was still clear profit. At last he said firmly, "Look here, Gypsy, I'll tell you what we'll do, and this is my last word. You shall hand me over 6 shillings and 6 pence, cash down, and further, in addition thereto, you shall give me such a breakfast, as much breakfast as I can possibly eat, at one sitting, of course, out of that iron pot of yours that keeps sending forth such delicious and exciting smells. In return, I will make over to you my spirited young horse, with all the beautiful harness and trappings that are on him, freely thrown in. If that's not good enough for you, say so, and I'll be getting on. I know a man near here that's wanted this horse of mine for years." The gypsy grumbled frightfully, and declared he did know a few more deals of the sort. If he did any more deals of the sort, he'd be ruined. But in the end, he lugged a dirty canvas bag out of the depths of his trousers pockets, and counting out 6 shillings and 6 pence into Toad's paw. When he disappeared into the caravan for an instant, he returned with a large iron plate and a fork and a knife and a spoon. He tilted up the pot, and a glorious stream of hot, rich stew gurgled onto the plate. It was indeed the most beautiful stew in the world, being made of partridges, pheasants, chicken and hares, and rabbits and peahens and guinea fowls, and 1 or 2 other things. Toad took the plate in his lap, almost crying, and stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and kept asking for more, and the gypsy never grudged him. He thought that he had never eaten so good a breakfast in his whole life. When Toad had taken as much stew on board as he thought he could possibly hold, he got up and said goodbye to the gypsy, and took an affectionate farewell of the horse and the gypsy, who knew the riverside well, and gave him directions which way to go, and he set forth on his travels again in the best possible spirits. He was indeed a very different Toad from the animal an hour ago. The sun was shining brightly, his wet clothes were quite dry again, he had money in his pocket once more, and he was nearing home and friends and safety. And most and best of all, he had a substantial meal, hot and nourishing, and he felt big and strong and careless and self-confident. He trampled along gaily. He thought of his adventures and escapes, and how, when things seemed to be at the worst, had always managed to find a way out, and his pride and conceit began to swell within him. "Ho, ho," he said to himself as he marched along, and his chin in the air. "What a clever Toad I am! There is surely no animal equal to me for cleverness in the whole world. My enemies shut me up in prison, encircled me by sentries, watched night and day by warders. I walk out through them all by sheer ability coupled with courage. They pursue me with engines and policemen and revolvers, and I snap my fingers at them and vanish, laughing into space. I am, unfortunately, thrown into a canal by a woman fat of body and very evil-minded. What of it? I swim ashore, I seize her horse, and I ride off in triumph, and I sell the horse for a whole packetful of money and an excellent breakfast. Ho, ho, I am the Toad, the handsome, the popular, the successful Toad." He got so puffed up with conceit that he made up a song as he walked in praise of himself, and he sang it at the top of his voice, though there was no one to hear him but him. It was perhaps the most conceitful song that any animal had ever composed. "The world has held great heroes, as history books have showed, but never a name to go down in fame compared that of Mr. Toad. The clever men at Oxford know all there is to be knowed, but none of them know half as much as intelligent Mr. Toad. The animals sat in the ark and cried, their tears and torrents flowed. Who was it, they said, there's land ahead, encouraging Mr. Toad. The army all saluted as they marched along the road. What was it, the king or Kitchener? Oh no, it was Mr. Toad. The Queen and her ladies in waiting sat in the window and sewed. She cried, "Look, who is that handsome man?" They answered, "Mr. Toad." There was a great deal more of that same sort, but too dreadfully conceited to be written down. These are some of the milder verses. He sang as he walked, and he walked as he sang, and he got more inflated every minute, but his pride was shortly to have a severe fall. After some miles of country lanes, he reached the high road, and as he turned into it and glanced along its white length, he saw approaching him a speck that turned into a dot, and then into a blob, and then to something very familiar, and a double note of warning, only too well known, fell on his delighted ear. "This is something like," said the excited Toad. "This is real life again. This is once more the great world from which I have been missed so long. I will hail them, my brothers of the wheel, and pitch them a yarn of the sort that has been so successful hitherto, and they will have to give me a lift, of course, and then I will talk to them some more, and perhaps with luck it may even end in my driving up to Toad Hall in a motor car. That will be one for the Badger." He stepped confidently out into the road to hail the motor car, which came along at an easy pace, slowing down as it neared the lane, when suddenly he became very pale. His heart turned to water, his knees shook and yielded under him, and he doubled up and collapsed with a sickening pain in his interior. And well he might, the unhappy animal, for the approaching car was the very one he had stolen out of the yard of the Red Lion Hotel on that fatal day when his troubles began. And the people in it were the very same people he had sat and watched at luncheon in the coffee room. He sank down in a shabby, miserable heap in the road, murmuring to himself in despair, "It's all up. It's all over now. Chains and policemen again, prison again, dry bread and water again. Oh, what a fool I have been. And what I want to go strutting about the country for, singing conceited songs and hailing people in broad day on the high road, instead of hiding till nightfall and slipping home quietly by the back ways. Oh, hapless Toad! Oh, ill-fated animal!" A terrible motor car drew slowly nearer and nearer, until at last he heard it stop just short of him. Two gentlemen got out and walked round the trembling heap of crumpled misery lying on the road, and one of them said, "Oh dear, this is very sad. Here is this poor old thing, a washerwoman apparently, who has fainted in the road. Perhaps she is overcome by the heat, poor creature, or possibly she's not had any food today. Let's lift her into the car and take her to the nearest village, where doubtless she has friends." They tenderly lifted Toad into the motor car and propped him up with soft cushions and proceeded on their way. When Toad heard them talk in such a kind and sympathetic way, he knew that he was not recognised. His courage began to revive, and he cautiously opened one eye and then the other. "Look," said one of the gentlemen, "she is better already. The fresh air is doing her good. How do you feel now, ma'am?" "Oh, thank you kindly, sir," said Toad in a feeble voice. "I'm feeling a great deal better." "That's right," said the gentleman. "Now keep quite still, and above all, don't try to talk." "Oh, I won't," said Toad. "I was only thinking if I might sit in the front seat there beside the driver, where I could get the fresh air full in my face. I should soon be all right again." "What a very sensible woman," said the gentleman. "Of course you can." So carefully they helped Toad into the front seat beside the driver, and on they went again. Toad was almost himself again by now. He sat up, looked about him, and tried to beat down the tremors and the yearnings, the old cravings that rose up and beset him and took possession of him entirely. "It is fate," he said to himself. "Why strive, why struggle?" And he turned to the driver to his side. "Please, sir, if you would kindly let me try and drive the car for a little. I've been watching you so carefully, and it looks so easy and so interesting, and I should like to be able to tell my friends that I once had driven a motor car." The driver laughed at the proposal, so heartily that the gentleman inquired what the matter was. When he heard, he said to the Toad's delight, "Bravo, ma'am, I like your spirit. Let her have a try, and look after her. She won't do any harm." Toad eagerly scrambled into the seat vacated by the driver, took the steering wheel, into his hands, listened with affected humility, can't even say that word, humility, to the instructions given to him, and set the car in motion. He very slowly and very carefully at first, and he was determined to be prudent. The driver behind clapped their hands and applauded, and Toad heard them saying, "How well she does it! Fancy a washerwoman driving a car as well as that for the first time." Toad went a little faster, then faster still, and faster. He heard the gentleman call out warningly, "Be careful, washerwoman," and this annoyed him, and he began to lose his head. The driver tried to intervene, and he pinned him down on his car seat with one elbow and put it on full speed. The rush of air in his face, the hum of the engines, and the light jump of the car beneath him intoxicated his weak brain. "Washerwoman indeed," he shouted recklessly. "Ho, ho, I am the Toad, the motor-car snatcher, the prison breaker, the Toad who always escapes. Sit still, and if you shall know what driving really is, you are in the hands of the famous, the skillful, and entirely fearless Toad." With a cry of horror, the whole party rose and flung themselves on him. "Seize him," they cried. "Seize the Toad, the wicked animal who stole our motor car. Bind him, chain him, drag him to the nearest police station. Down with the desperate and dangerous Toad." Alas, they should have thought. They should have ought to have been more prudent. They should have remembered to stop the motor car somehow before playing pranks of that sort. With a half turn of the wheel, Toad sent the car crashing through the low hedge that ran alongside the roadside. One mighty bound, a violent shock, and the wheels of the car were churning up a thick mud in a horse pond. Toad found himself flying through the air with a strong upward rush and delicate curve of a swallow. He liked the motion, and was beginning to wonder whether it would go on until he developed wings, and he turned into a toad bird, when he landed on his back with a thump in the soft rich grass of the meadow. Sitting up, he could just see the motor car in the pond, nearly submerged. The gentleman and the driver, encumbered by their long coats, were floundering helplessly in the water. He picked himself up rapidly and set off running across the country as hard as he could, scrambling through hedges, jumping ditches, pounding across fields until he was breathless and weary, and he had to settle down into an easy walk. When he had recovered his breath somewhat, and he was able to think calmly, he began to giggle, and from giggling he took to laughing, and he laughed until he had to sit down under a hedge. "Ho, ho," he cried in ecstasies of self-admiration. "Toad again!" Toad, as usual, comes out on top. Who was it who got him to give them a lift? Who managed to get in the front seat for the sake of fresh air? Who persuaded them into letting them see if he could drive? Who landed them all in a horse pond? Who escaped flying gaily and unscathed through the air, leaving a narrow-minded, grudging, timid excursionists in the mud where they should rightly be? Why, Toad, of course. Clever, clever, great Toad, good Toad. And he burst into song again and chanted with uplifted voice. The motor car went poop, poop, poop as it raced along the road. Who was it that steered it into a pond? Ingenious Mr. Toad. Oh, how clever I am, how clever, how very clever. A slight noise at a distance behind him made him turn his head and look. Oh, horror, oh, misery, oh, despair. About 2 fields off, a chauffeur in his leather gaiters and 2 large rural policemen were visible, running towards him as hard as they could go. Poor Toad sprang to his feet and pelted away, his heart in his mouth. "Oh my," he gasped as he panted along. "What an arse I am, what a conceited and headless arse, swaggering again, shouting and singing songs again, sitting still and gassing again. Oh my, oh my, oh my." He glanced back and saw to his dismay that they were gaining on him. On he ran desperately, but kept looking back and saw that they had still gained steadily. He did his best, but he was a fat animal and his legs were short, and they still gained. He could hear them close behind now, ceasing to heed where he was going. He struggled on blindly, wildly, looking back over his shoulder at the now triumphant enemy, when suddenly the earth failed under his feet, and he grasped at the air, and splash, he found himself head over heels in deep water. Rapid water, water that bore him along with a force that he should not contend with, and he knew that in his blind panic that he had run straight into a river. He rose to the surface and tried to grasp the reeds and the rushes that grew along the water's edge close to the bank, but the stream was so strong that it tore him out of his hands. "Oh my," gasped Toad, "if I ever steal a motor car again, if I ever sing another conceited song." And down he went and came up breathless and spluttering. Presently he saw that he was approaching a big dark hole in the bank, just above his head, and as the stream bore past him as he reached up with a paw and caught hold of the edge and held on. Then slowly, with difficulty, he drew up himself out of the water, till at last he was able to rest his elbows on the edge of the hole. There he remained for some minutes, puffing and panting, for he was quite exhausted. As he sighted and blew and stared before him into the dark hole, some bright small things shone and twinkled in its depths, moving towards him as it approached. A face grew up, and gradually around it was a familiar face, brown and small with whiskers, grave and round with neat ears and silky hair. It was the water rat.